I'm Teresa Beanken, CEO of National Speakers Bureau Canada and Global Speakers Agency, and we envision that the sharing of ideas inspires action to make the world a better place. They're bringing you expert speakers and thought leaders for your conferences, training programs, and events, whether they be in person, hybrid, or online. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. Farrah Khan has been working at the intersections of gender justice and equity through education, policy, art creation, and advocacy for 2 decades. She's founder of Possibility Seeds, a member of the Government of Canada's Federal Strategy Against Gender-Based Violence Advisory Council, and the manager of Consent Comes First at Ryerson University. She makes challenging topics accessible in her engaging and informed approach. And she's founder of innovative community projects, including Use the Right Words, and co-director of Courage to Act, the first national project of its kind to address and prevent gender-based violence on post-secondary campuses in Canada. She regularly contributes to national media like the CBC, the Globe and Mail, the New York Times, with her expertise in addressing harassment, communications, and gender-based violence. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including the Toronto Community Foundation Vital People Award. Farrah holds a combined double major from York University in Women's Studies and Environmental Studies, and a Master's of Social Work from the University of Toronto. And in 2018, Farrah was appointed to the Gender Equality Advisory Council for the G7 Summit. At the summit, Farrah addressed an audience of world leaders, including Donald Trump, Angela Merkel, and Justin Trudeau, insisting that any discussion about a thriving, sustainable, and peaceful world is not possible without taking concrete action on gender equity. We're pleased to have her with us today. Welcome, Farrah.
Hi, Teresa. I'm so happy to be here talking about some of my favorite topics, which is how to cultivate consent in the workplace. So thank you so much to the NSB for this invitation. And I'm so excited to see people that I know on this and also new folks. So this is really great for me. So my really piece is that I go across Canada and around North America talking about building consent cultures in workplaces, in our homes, in our relationships, in our schools. And I really love that conversation because it speaks to workplace wellness. It also talks about bias intervention and ways that we can actually systemically also end this harm. And so today I'm going to talk about a bunch of those pieces. And so making sure that we're in a comfortable place, that we're ready to go, and that we're also feeling comfortable having this conversation. So do what you need in this moment to kind of get in a comfortable moment, and we'll be getting going. So we're going to be talking about building consent culture in the workplace today. And I love that conversation because, there's an assumption that because we're in different places right now, or people are coming back to the office, that we don't need to have this conversation, but we do. And I want to talk to you why. But the first thing I want to name, and it's so important, is that we take a deep breath, because these conversations aren't easy. Talking about sexual harassment and violence can bring up our own experiences, our own knowledge around that. It can also bring up things that have not been dealt with well. So take a deep breath, not that shallow one that you've been doing to get through COVID, but that deep one, that one that you inhale and then you exhale. And just ground yourself. You get your feet on the floor, put your hands on your table, whatever you need to feel safe in this moment. And so I want to hear how you're feeling. So from a scale of 1 to 6 in the chat, could you share how you're feeling today? I can tell you for me, I'm definitely was a 1 this morning trying to deal with my rambunctious 2-year-old. And I'm feeling a little bit of a 6, but I'm also feeling a 4. Like I'm really kind of feeling it today. How are other people doing? Oh, I love seeing that other folks are feeling different ways. Oh, lots of 5s, lots of like closely watching, some grumpy cats in the room and some very tired folks. Oh, somebody's a 7, so you're like off the scale. Lovely to see. And Catherine, you are a 5. Fair. I think you're in a very good company with folks. Yeah. Oh, Ellen, you and I are buddies that we're feeling this. So this is so great. I love seeing that people are feeling different ways. And that's important to notice, is that everybody's going to come to a conversation about sexual harassment, come to a conversation about building consent culture from different perspectives, based on our day, based on our social location, based on our past experiences, and everything is okay in these conversations. I really want us to think too, is what's possible now that wasn't before COVID times. Now we're in them. We're having different conversations than we've ever had before about consent. People are talking about it in relation to COVID. So, talking to someone before they come to their house. I've been tested. Have you been tested? I am fully vaccinated. Are you? Having conversations about people we're with, what we're doing. And that's been so amazing because it makes people start thinking about consent outside of sexual situations and also how we treat each other in the workplace, how we treat each other in our friendships and our community. And so I want us to have courage as we examine our practices at work and take action when these things occur so that people that are being subjected to sexual harassment, are subjected to unconsensual experiences, are able to kind of say, hey, this thing is happening. And you as a leader can say, absolutely, I know how to address that. I'm ready to go. These are the things we're going to put in place. And I want us to think of ourselves as that we don't have to always be the leader with it. I love this image of birds flocking. And if you don't know about birds flocking, it's such a beautiful piece when you see it in the sky. And what's really beautiful about it that I love is that when birds flock together, like they make these images at different times, the different birds are leaders. And that's kind of like us right now. At different times, we're going to take leadership about sexual harassment. Different times, we're going to cultivate that leadership. And other times, we're going to take a step back and do other things. Or we're going to take a step back to take a breath, to rejuvenate ourselves. We're going to take a step back because we have to take care of other things, our families, our communities. And so really looking at this as not an individual action that has to be taken, but as a community action that we're all going to stick together with each other and work together on this. And I want you to think about like, what is a good day at work for you? You know, what makes a good day at work? For me, a good day at work is where I'm respected by my colleagues. You know, you can share in the chat how you're feeling about a good day at work, but respected by colleagues, understood around my expertise, and treated with care. I think that's a really important piece. And what we know a lot of times now with COVID, people are going through a really difficult time based on economically they are, maybe they have family members that have COVID, maybe they're caring for people in their lives that have directly been harmed by this, or they're also dealing with concerns about their own workplace or family. And what's important to know about that is that we create that support system in there. We don't want people to conceal or hide that. And it can feel that sometimes people are saying, everything's fine, when it really feels like everything's on fire. And a part of our work as leaders and as community advocates is that we're going to make sure that people don't have to do this on their own, that we're supporting them in that conversation. And stress is coming up, right? So stressors are anxiety-producing events and experiences. They can be acute or chronic. Right now, we're in a global stress. We are in stress in terms of economics, in terms of our community, in terms of everything based on COVID, and also things that are coming up. So things like climate crisis, things like sexual violence that keeps being in the media, all kinds of things are coming on that makes it really difficult for us sometimes to feel comfortable addressing issues in time because there's so many things going on. And our window of tolerance gets smaller when we're having these kind of stressors. And I love this image by Lindsay Berman. And she really talks about the window of tolerance conversation. So that piece where we're in that rainbow moment that we can take in new information, that we can communicate new information, that we can take on issues that are really overwhelming and kind of piece them apart and take action on them. But sometimes our window of tolerance gets smaller when we're under stress or under a lot of duress. And so it's important to know that that can have impact on us, where we can go to a place of blowing up, that thunder shower with lightning bolts, or we can just shut down, when the snow's coming. And so it's important to know where we're at in this moment and really give ourselves tenderness and care to know when we can address things and when we need other people in that flock of birds that we're in to take care of it with us. An important part of building consent in the workplace is having a workplace understanding of what consent is. I love this conversation by Planned Parenthood. I think they just do such a great job breaking down what consent looks like, both in a sexual relationship, but in all relationships. And so they talk about it being freely given. So freely given, that means that I am not pressured or coerced, or someone's telling me, you'll lose your job if you don't do X. That I have the support that I need to make decisions that are right for me and my family and my community. That it's also reversible. So I might say, yes, I want to do that. And then when I realize the circumstances around something, or I realize information that wasn't given to me before, I may say no, and I don't get held to the thing that I said yes to before. It's also informed. So I have all the information that I need to make an informed decision about if I'm going to consent or not. And that's a really important piece. So many of us, I don't know about you, but when I first started out in jobs, I would sign up for jobs that later on I would be like, oh, wait a minute, that didn't get all the information. It was not in my contract that I was expected to do X, Y, Z. That's not informed consent. And so a part of the conversation is, how do I make informed consent be a part of all my workplace endeavors. It's also enthusiastic. So that means I want to be there. I'm not being, again, pressured or told that I have to be there, that I'm excited to be there. And it's also specific. So if I consent to one thing, like going to this meeting and making this presentation, it doesn't mean that every time I'm going to consent to the same thing. So it's important that the workplace understands that and how that plays out in terms of how we treat each other. So I love, thinking about it from a really simplistic idea of ask, listen, respect the decision. And, this was a poster that was put around UBC campus to talk about consent in terms of dating, but I think it's actually make consent a part of your approach for all ways that we talk to people. So, when you're talking to a coworker and you want to unload or talk about something very personal, I think saying to them, I want to talk about something really personal. Do you have the bandwidth or ability to listen to me right now or at all? And it's important to ask somebody, wait for their response, listen, and respect their decision. And when we do that and show our coworkers and show other staff that we can build that consent culture, what we're doing is naming that consent is a part of the way we do our work in our workplace. And that's important. Here's one example of how kids are doing it right now, which I love.
Good morning, bed. Good morning,
This is my favorite one. So why I wanted to show that example is that we make consent sometimes sound really difficult or hard to do, but we need to treat people how they wanted to be treated. Kim Katrin, who is another speaker as part of the NSB family, always says the golden rule is to treat people how they want to be treated. And so I think that conversation is really important for us. And so it's thinking about asking people about how they want to be greeted in the workplace when you're coming back for COVID. It's asking people, do you have some boundaries before you come back into the workplace? It was really amazing. I was with some coworkers and they were talking on a Zoom call and they were like, yeah, we're going to go out for dinner. And I had to say, you know what, to my manager, I actually don't want to go out for dinner because I don't know if everybody is fully vaccinated and I don't feel comfortable at this time doing that. And I was able to tell that to my boss. My boss respected that, didn't have to blast it to everybody, but respected my decision and heard me out and made other arrangements so I could engage in company events, but not have to do it in person. And so really understanding and being flexible about that, and having some boundaries around it, which is important. Oh, I'm just going to pass this for a second. And so another example of building consent in the workplace, even online, is respecting people's pronouns and making sure they're in Zoom. And that's something that I actually usually do, which I change all the time, is rename myself. I always put my pronouns in so that people know what my pronouns are and that people respect my pronouns. Also asking permission to screenshot. So we've seen examples. It becomes kind of a joke on Twitter and Zoom conversations or on TikTok, which I don't like, where people are filming folks in their workplace. And there was an example on TikTok just recently where an employee was being filmed all the time by this young woman. She's like, this is my crush at Starbucks. And he sent her a note on her coffee cup and said, please stop filming me. It's creepy. And I really love that because he was naming a boundary and he was saying like, this isn't okay. And so here's an example of that, or asking permission for a video call. People can tell you in my life that I love video calls. I love seeing people. I miss them. But a lot of my friends are like, I don't do video calls. I don't feel cute right now. Or my coworkers are like, I'm not really feeling that. Or I don't have the bandwidth right now. And so really asking before doing is a big part of building consent culture. And so in the chat, could you share with me a couple ways that you're building consent culture in the workplace? You can think about it as we go along in this conversation, but I want us to keep thinking about it because it's really important that we take consent outside of that bedroom and start talking about it in all our interactions in the way we work. Because if we don't, then we don't respect people where they're at. So an example of building consent in the workplace is respecting people when they're on vacation. So it's not sending them messages. It's not sending them invitations or saying, hey, I need you right now to do this thing. It's actually respecting the fact that that's a boundary that they've set and we have to respect them on that. And when consent doesn't happen in the workplace, things can happen and escalate and be harmful. And so we know that sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence are built on things like homophobia, transphobia, white supremacy, anti-Black racism. And it's really important that we address them in a way that's actually going to meet the needs of our community. So when we brush off a joke in the workplace, or we say, oh, that's not a big deal, we're telling a coworker, we're telling a staff member, we're telling a person that we supervise that their identity, their social location, their needs, their boundaries are not going to be respected, which is not okay. And that can lead to things when we don't respect people, when we create a culture of disrespect in the workplace, it can lead to things like harassment, threats, and verbal abuse, which is the most common form of sexual harassment that occurs and can build up to and lead to or be connected to things like sexual assault, physical, emotional, financial abuse, and can lead to things like murder. And so what we know is that we have to address in the workplace because we cannot say that a staff member is going to be left to their devices. And what we know is 3 in 10 Canadians say that they've been sexually harassed at work, but few report to their employers. I want to change that. I want to change it with all of you. I want to make sure that staff feel safe to tell their employers and feel safe to tell people when things occur. And it's important to understand how sexual harassment happens in the workplace. So it does not happen in isolation. It's part of a bigger, broader experience of work that doesn't distinguish between private life and work life. And when we link, we have to make the link that it's linked to systemic oppression. So we address, anti-Black racism in the workplace, colonialism, racism. We're actually going to address sexual harassment. And we also have to understand that people's experiences of sexual harassment are different based on their social location and their past histories. And sexual harassment happens in lots of ways. So things like crossing boundaries, leering, unwanted flirting, sharing inappropriate messages through WhatsApp, through different messaging, degrading jokes or comments, invalidating someone's gender or sexuality, spreading rumors about people's sexual past. So, oh, she only got that job or he only got that job because of who they were sleeping with. Or intrusive questions. So asking questions about people's gender identity or people's sex life. Does anybody watch Grey's Anatomy? That all shows sexual harassment in the workplace. But there's one example I always think about. There was a character called April Kepner who, people found out that she didn't have sex before, and everybody in her workplace started talking about it and making fun of her about it. I'm like, that is a directly intrusive questions, asking her the question and then making comments about it. It's not okay. Yes, I think every Thursday, Sophia, you're with me. So if you looked at this list of impacts, if you looked at this list and I said to you, an employee has difficulty focusing, didn't participate, low morale, they're thinking of quitting their job, they're not coming to work, they're avoiding things, would you say they're a good employee? Probably not. But if I said to you that it was the impact of sexual harassment in the workplace, then you'd have a different understanding of it. And that's what I want you to have. I want us to have a compassionate workplace that understands the impacts of sexual harassment so employees don't internalize the message that I'm a bad employee, instead going to the place of something horrible happened to me that made me react this way to this harm. And so I want you to think about what are some of the barriers to reporting sexual harassment in your industry? Are you in a small industry? Or are you in an industry that's built on relationships? I can imagine, people even in the NSB and the speakers industry, you're networking so much, you're in a place where sometimes, relationships mean so much. And so it can be really difficult to report somebody when you're worried about a relationship being harmed. But we need to challenge that narrative. And I want to work with you around that. What we know too is that 7 out of 10 people who reported sexual harassment in the workplace said they faced some form of retaliation up to and including being fired. So there's lots of ways in which people are harassed after they've been reporting harassment. And it's important that we create holistic policies and practices and training around this to address this harm. And company policies are really important in this. We know that company policies that promote safety and equity are good for workers, good for the community, and good for businesses. Companies lose about $22,500 in productivity per harassed individual, not to mention the added cost of employee turnover, legal costs, and reputational harm. And this was a research done by Time's Up. I really love this research because it's really important to see if you can get people to understand you from a just basic, we care about human being place, be like, it hurts your bottom line. It really affects things. And people feel very alone when sexual harassment happens. They feel alone, they feel not respected, not cared for. And so part of our work is actually putting our hand out and saying, we're here to support you. I like to look at it like being like alpacas with each other. We support people when harm happens. We don't leave anybody behind in our herd. And so 3 aspects of community care can be things like assessing for safety, being with others, and caring for the survivor. So making sure that we're doing the support that we need for survivors that are experiencing and being subjected to sexual harassment. And one example of doing that is learning bias intervention. I do that a lot in my trainings with workplaces and help them develop programming around that. I love the 5 Ds that come from Hollerback. They talk about delay, distract, delegate, document, and direct. So I'm going to ask you a question with that. If you were at a party and you saw this guy, how would you intervene as a bystander? So I'm going to give you 5 ways you can do it. And Teresa's going to put up this lovely poll and you're going to vote on which one you would want to use. Would you distract? Would you go up and just start dancing in between them? Would you delay? Would you go up to them like Michael Scott and be like, are you okay? How are you doing? Yes, these are all from The Office. Would you document? Would you take a photo of it or videotape it so that the survivor had documentation of the harm that was occurring? Would you delegate? Would you go to security or would you go to a friend of the person who's committing the harm and say, this thing is happening, can you do something? Or would you just be direct like Kelly Kapoor and go up to the person causing the harm and be like, how dare you? So we're going to close the poll in about 5 seconds. So I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Teresa, do you want to tell me the results of our amazing poll?
Yes, I would be happy to. The majority of the people would distract. So 47% would distract, 26% would delegate, 21% direct, 5% delay, and 2% document.
I love it. I love that people are really interested in distraction. I find that the easiest one for me to do sometimes because it's not directly creating a disturbance with the person who's causing harm, but it's supporting the person who's being harmed. All these are correct. And that's what's so great about learning bias intervention and practicing with your team is you can collectively get better at supporting survivors and people who've caused harm too, by you're treating them saying, hey, what you're doing is not okay. And we're going to call you in the workplace so you don't do it again. And so leaders can cultivate consent in the workplace in a number of ways. They can understand and communicate institutional policies. They can ask, listen, and respect the boundaries of the staff team. They can foster a trauma, consent, and violence-informed team. They can recognize the impact of trauma in learning and work performance. They can commit to a generous practice so no one is left behind, because oftentimes survivors say, I don't feel like anyone cares about me. We do. And they can provide opportunities for ongoing annual learning. One of the big things you can do is what I like to say is remind people that are at your workplace that it's more important that they're safe than they are being polite. And they're allowed to set boundaries in the workplace so that they don't have to say that it's just a part of this job or part of this industry that they have to put up with harassment. It shouldn't be. Another thing you can do is the BRAVE model. I developed this when I was 18. I have used it for 20 years, and it's a model that really talks about how to deal with disclosures. The first thing you can do in the BRAVE model is believe. Believe the survivor when they tell you it. Doesn't mean you have to be the judge or jury. Doesn't mean you're investigating. It just means you're saying to them, I believe you, and opening up that space that you understand what they're going through. You're going to respect their confidentiality, their boundaries around what they want to do next, under, of course, the policies that exist within your workplace and under the provincial and federal policies you work under. You're going to ask what support looks like. Support might look like you going with them to the police or walking them through the policy or getting a glass of water for them. Really ask. You're going to validate them. So you're going to validate and say, I'm so sorry that this happened. It's not your fault. And you're going to have empathy for them and for yourself, because it takes a lot to take in these disclosures. So what we do is we believe, we respect, we ask, we validate, and we empathize. So I just went through in the past, 20 minutes, a conversation about sexual violence and harassment and building consent workplaces. Do people have any questions for me right now?
Thank you so much, Farrah. This was really informative, and I have so much appreciation for how you take some challenging topics and make them really accessible and actually let us smile and breathe throughout it as well. So thank you. I'm taking a look for any questions here. Hold on for a moment. We have a question from Amy. Are you ready for this?
Yep.
Right.
So how do organizations and teams balance need for building and maintain a positive workplace culture and team dynamics with obtaining consent around boundaries? So it's like asking with this new idea of asking for consent for video calls. Yeah, that's a great question, Amy. You know what I sometimes would say is that you could say to people, give people options. So you could say, okay, we're meeting today, and people could say, you know what, if you're not feeling up to it, you don't have to have your camera on. And making that an option for folks, it's not saying, turn your camera off for everything, but it's giving people an option that some days are not going to feel good about that or not feel ready for it. And there was a really amazing research that was done about Black women returning to the office. And a lot of Black women are saying, I don't want to return to the office because there's such a performance piece there in terms of me feeling that I, have to talk about different things with other folks, or sometimes I just want to be on camera because my hair isn't done a certain way. Sometimes I don't want to do this because I don't feel comfortable all the time. And so that's an example of being like, hey, you don't have your camera on the time, and giving that option to everyone so that people may feel safe to say to you, thanks so much. I couldn't, my kid was in the room with me. Giving people that option allows for people to make choices that feel good for them, and still within the refrain of keeping a company culture. So they're there in the video call, but maybe their camera's not on.
Thank you for that. And we have a question from Lisa wondering, can you provide some perspective on the role of power and hierarchy when it comes to consent in the workplace?
I really appreciate that you brought that up, Lisa, because, a lot of conversations about consent are about power and control, right? And about sexual harassment. So it's really important that people in positions of power, so in terms of if I'm a manager and a supervisor, that people know where they can go in terms of reporting if the person that's harming me is a person in a position of power. I think that's really important. I think also putting it into the context, the understanding we're talking about consent, to talk about power, talk about the fact that, even consenting to something, when we say freely informed or freely given, it can be under duress that I'm freely giving, saying yes to a situation because I'm nervous that I might not be seen as a team player, not as a good staff member. So I can give you an example. I don't drink alcohol, but sometimes I felt pressure when I was younger to go to the bar and be a part of the team because that was where the team outings were. And so really having a space when I had managers later on that were like, oh, Farrah, I know you don't drink. So we're going to pick a space that has other things that we can do and be other places that we can stay and be around and other activities for us. They're not just based on around alcohol. And that was really amazing that we had that conversation. And it was about them being in a position of power to enact their power to support me as someone who was in a lower position. But I think it's really important to talk about that too, because there's an assumption that people just freely give consent, but it also is based on power. And so always talking about that and naming that, and also having policies that speak to the fact that if someone needs to report or someone needs to discuss something with some that is directly about their manager or their supervisor, that there's someone else in the company that they can report to about the harm. And that's, legislated under the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act. Not all policies around Occupational Health and Safety Act have that yet in Canada. We need to change them.
Thank you so much, as always. Really informative information with these questions. And I'd ask about, there's that combination of using words as well as symbols, and that video of the children that you showed was really helpful. In the events industry, for example, sometimes people are using wristbands or colors on their name tag, green, yellow, red, for what kind of interaction they want to have with people. What do you think about using symbols versus words to show your level of comfort or boundaries in certain areas?
I love it. I love anything that gets people excited about talking about consent. And so, we've seen people, I don't know if people go to cosplay events, but my son really likes characters. So I was like, oh, go. But I love that they had at this fan expo, they had this giant poster said, our costume doesn't need consent. And they had a whole conversation around that. I think event communities need to start talking way more about how they foster consent in those places. So if it's a wristband that says this is what I'm comfortable with, sometimes, it's even talking to my staff team. If you have a small staff team, I'm a hugger. So that video, I would be the one that would point the hug, but my whole staff team hates hugs. And so I have to respect what my staff needs, not what I want. And that's a really important thing. And so I think event professionals really need to think about how we cultivate consent. We know that a lot of sexual harassment and violence occurs at large conferences and events. And as we're coming back to those spaces, people who have not interacted with folks a long time may act in ways that are really harmful. And so we need to actually have those conversations prior to even people showing up. Yes, Catherine, I'm glad you're a hugger too. We can hug if you're consent.
Great. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, we have one last question. Who has said, I've had the experience of a female boss who made a casual insult about my body without really thinking about it before she said it clearly. to me, who the person was also a female, how do you say, oh, that wasn't really cool, when I don't feel the need to report it?
So it's a couple things you can do. I've done it where I have directly said so I was Kelly before in that moment where I was just direct. And I said, after reflection, so if I had a supervision with that person or I had a conversation with them later on, I'd be like, hey, just want to come back to that comment. I know you meant X by this. This is the impact on me. This is what I really like. If this happens next time, I really appreciate that we have a relationship that I can have that conversation with you, and I kind of call it like, I'm not going to swear here, but like a poo-poo sandwich. Like you put the kind of nice things on the top and the nice things on the bottom and put the kind of hard conversation in the middle. But I think it's important to say directly to the person, hey, this is the impact on me. This is what it felt like. I know you meant X. This is the impact on me. This is what I need going forward. You don't always have to report things if you don't feel like you need to, unless it's under your company policy. But I do think the thing is that we oftentimes live in a culture that we don't know how to call each other in. And that's something I do in a lot of my trainings about, how to call each other in with care. Because when we tell each other that something doesn't feel okay, then we're actually saying to them, I care about you so much in our relationship that I want to make it better, that I want to know how I can talk to you about stuff. And I want you to know how you can talk to me about things. And so that shows you as a great employee, a great leader, and a great friend. And I think that's a great opportunity and for you to have that. And I'm really sorry that happened, because talking about people's bodies, we can talk about consent and bodies all, just Adele, even just recently in the Oprah interview, I remember she was asked, what do you say to fans who feel hurt by your weight loss? And she was very clear. She said, that's personal. My choice around my body and things are personal, and no one should be asking people about that. And I really appreciate that, because we sometimes think we have access to people's bodies and can ask questions about weight loss and weight gain. No, you can't. Just stop.
Thank you. And I appreciated the approach of a bit of a framework so that it can apply to many different situations in terms of acknowledging it, recognizing the impact, what you're hoping for going forward, and maintaining and building the relationship. Thank you so much. This has been a really informative session, and appreciate all the questions and interaction by our audience and our speaker. Thank you for joining us. And we're here to help all of our audience members when you're looking to plan your next event, to find a really great speaker to make an impact on your audience. And hopefully Farrah is a great option for one of your coming events into next year. Thank you so much for the comments here. We'll leave the comments box open just for a couple more minutes, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day. Take care.